The Fairy Princess, an homage to my childhood. When I was a literal child, life was not looking too good. I was lonely, misunderstood, and quite frankly bullied. Despite being a big guy, I was emotional, feminine, and a coward. No thanks to the conditioning set by people around me, as well as the pop culture media at that time. And so, it is no wonder that flash games, anime, TV shows, and movies allowed me to escape such an abhorrent reality. In video games where I could do magic, characters and shows that paint a fairly healthy manly picture, and anime where you can have lots of friends even if you're weird. This would lead to me making my own characters, worlds, and stories, many of which directly inspired from said flash games, cartoons, and anime. Although it would be to no one's surprise that these creations had no coherent storylines or personalities, just a desperate need to cope with reality. Over the years, I would grow up, I became more mature, a bit more masculine, and have a more positive outlook on life thanks to a handful of friends and even games like Morrowind. I traveled to another city for college and was away from the places that troubled me. New beginnings, I suppose. By the time I was 20, life was pretty different. Loneliness was replaced with solitude, misunderstanding was replaced with empathy, and the bullying sort of stopped. I can't put my finger on why though. Nevertheless, after trudging through my art journey in college, after a year of deep practice, and finishing my first complete webcomic dream journal, the pandemic hit, and so I was back home again. While I used the opportunity to continue my practice with art in general, such as pencil drawings, watercolor, digital painting, and catch up on my electronics and crafts, like my Dead Space cosplay and audio spectrum analyzer, after finishing Dream Journal, it left a huge hole in my heart, as if something was incomplete. I couldn't help but feel a mental burden. I knew I had to make a new comic again. It was the right thing to do. However, knowing what I learned from doing Dream Journal, I knew I couldn't do Imaginus Vectis just yet. I needed a full long narrative story with consistent characters and a genuine reason to do them. And it hit me, my old childhood stories. I went through my old sketchbooks, computer files, and folders to find inspiration and ideas. I found my old drawings of a dragon slayer, which would ultimately become the woodsman turned knight, a vampiric shadow man, which after revision became this vampire pope. And in those stories, there would be talks of a princess, but I never drew her a lot, and perhaps many of those papers were lost, and so I made my own concept of her using whatever material I could archive from my childhood drawings. The Mortanoid, portals, and fish people, it was like traveling back through time and having my child self tell me the story himself. So, while school was out, I began writing the full story from chapters 1 to 11. It was a very janky but simple script to make and follow, and thumbnailed until the 5th chapter during summer of 2020. When June came about, school was delayed until August, and so I captured the opportunity and did all the pencil and line work on June. And so for about 30 days, I penciled 50 pages, almost half the comic, and instead of inking them digitally, I just tuned the sliders in Photoshop to erase the grays, leaving only the white and black, making an ink piece directly from the pencils. Then I colored and lettered them in July, and so by the time school started, I began formatting them each week to upload to Webtoons and Tapas. This would go on, and in the first semester of class, I uploaded the first 5 chapters, and in the second semester would upload the last 6 chapters. Although the last 6 chapters were rough because I had to make them while taking classes, and I just experienced how little time I had. And so, in Christmas break, there was yet another delay in classes, and so I jumped on the opportunity again and furiously finished penciling and inking by the time classes returned. And during the last few weeks of second semester, I was both coloring my pages while listening to and watching lectures. Eventually, I finished the comic around early 2021. 115 pages, a full-blown narrative story, a real graphic novel. After going through what was both the bloom of my art and academically punishing year of my life, I was able to make it, and right as I finished it, I knew that I was ready for the long game. I was ready for Imaginis Vectis, my grand story. But that would be a story for another day. Despite escapism being constantly argued as a detriment to one's life, such as video games and movies, I can't help but rebuke such a thought. Without these fictional characters and stories, many, including I, wouldn't have been able to make peace and move on with our mental states at such turbulent times. My childhood characters and stories were an important part of my coping mechanism that has allowed me to grow and develop as an individual. And while the reason for the creation of this webcomic was as a stepping stone to prepare me for my next one, I can't help but feel as though I gave my childhood self a proper homage, to honor the boy who once lived, who was once me. That someone so alone and ridiculed was the true creator of this story, and I but merely unearthed it before it would be forgotten. We must acknowledge these things, the children we once were, innocence now lost, our ideals of knights, purity of princesses, feats of awe and whatnot, lost to degeneracy, addictions, and peer pressure. Perhaps it was right of me at that time to look back at myself, my child self, weak and friable, yet pure, ideal, and innocent. Now that I have become strong and firm through the trials of degeneracy and real-world troubles, it is perhaps time to incorporate honorable ideals before innocence lost. And like how this comic is a stepping stone to the next, the reincorporation of my childhood self is a stepping stone to making my peace with it. And so that was my experience making my comic The Fairy Princess, a bit of an emotional journey or story overall. And while I haven't made a complete peace with my childhood self just yet, this part of the journey still has lifted a heavy burden. With that being said, I hope these experiences help you on your way, and know that when you set yourself out there to do something grand, no one will have the right to judge you for not having tried.